excited today that we're going to the Glenveagh Castle for the conclusion of the AE Russell, George Russell exhibition there at the Glenveagh Castle, the Caisleán Ghleann Bheatha. So it's really exciting, so here we go!
It's always a delight to be here. It's a beautiful part of the world, and it's also somewhere very close to the heart of AE Russell, very strong associations. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to speak generally about AE Russell for those who don't know that much about him, just to put him on your map. And then Jim's going to talk about some aspects of Russell, particularly his love of nature and the mystical elements of that. And then Charlie will talk about AE's close association with Marble Hill and all the places he used to be around in Donegal. So there's our man. And who was he? Born in Lurgan in 1867, spent his childhood there, then the family moved to Dublin. And he spent most of his public life in Dublin. Although he visited America and other places. He was, from a very young age, he got these mystical visions. We think they started when he was running around the Brownlow domain in Lurgan, and he carried them through, and he was always puzzled as to why he was receiving these visions and what they meant. And as a relatively young man, he rejected the whole idea of institutional Christianity, but he was still drawn to find some explanation, some spiritual explanation for his visions. And that's just a little place in Lurgan where he was born. You can see the blue plaque above the door, and there on the window, that's Lurgan today, is one of his paintings, and that was used on the cover of A Woman's Heart 2, I think that one was. So he's still remembered in Lurgan, even though your average citizen probably doesn't know that much about him. We called this talk AE Russell, Ireland's Forgotten Superstar. Simply lifted that heading from Vincent Kearney of RTE, who did a piece on Russell, and that's what he called him. And the reason, of course, is that from about 1895 to 1930, the most interesting years probably in Irish history, Russell was at the centre of everything. He was at the centre of the literary revival, art, painting, politics, economics, rural reform, the cooperative movement, and anything that needed designed or promoted. And at the same time, he edited a couple of the most influential journals, the Irish Homestead and the Irish Statesman. He was probably the top journalist and commentator over that time. As a young guy in Dublin, he met the poet W.B. Yeats at art school. And they, apart from painting together, they started writing poetry together. We're convinced that AE Russell is the reason that W.B. Yeats became a great poet, because he wanted to be a painter. And his father was a painter, John Yeats, brilliant portrait painter, and his younger brother, Jack Yeats, probably Ireland's leading visual artist ever. And I think when WB realised that his father was better, his kid brother was better, and now his new best friend was better, time to turn his talents to something else. And he went for the poetry because he wanted to be the top of some artistic pursuit. But he learned a valuable lesson from his father, which was he also wanted to earn a living because his father was constantly broke, despite his obvious talent. They became lifelong friends, and they, again, searching for this, making sense of these visions and this spiritual identity. He joined the Theosophy House in Ely Place, Dublin. And I suppose today that would be like almost a sort of yuppie, hippie commune of its time, where all these earnest young people, educated people, looking for enlightenment and truth and beauty and so on. But he spent 7 years there. And by the time he came out, he really did know what he was about. He had become a theosophist. And essentially, what that meant was he took on board the central beliefs of theosophism, which were that you had a duty to your fellow man or woman, you had a duty to yourself, to self-improvement, and to work for others. He, given his spiritual nature, could easily have found a life, happy life, as a meditative monk or something. But he believed through the theosophy that you had to serve others as well. And he believed in a universal brotherhood, which meant everyone was equal, irrespective of race, religion, gender, any of those things. So it was quite ahead of its time. He then got a job in the cooperative movement under Horace Plunkett, and he went down that road, and Yeats went off to London to seek fame and fortune, and they sort of drifted apart. He went around the country setting up cooperative banks all over the place, notably here in Donegal, the Temple Crone one, which is still very much on the go in Dunlow, where he persuaded the first Pap to cope. We could go on with that. But overall, across his lifetime, he became this central figure to all that was happening in Ireland. And there was a lot of conflict, a lot of turbulence. And throughout all that, he was a voice of reason and moderation. There's him and Yeats. Already Yeats, to A's disapproval, had got the cravats and the velvet coat, and he had a monocle, and he'd cutting a dash as a literary figure, which A had no time for. It's all about truth and beauty, not about career. I'll just go to his poetry. He's probably most famous for his poetry, his journalism, and his paintings. And the paintings and the poems were quite similar. They were either mystical in character, nature, or they were just about the beauty of nature. And you can see what people said about him. And that's W.B. Yeats famously praised nobody, but the one poet of modern Ireland who has moulded spiritual ecstasy into verse, most delicate and subtle poetry that any Irishman of our time has written. And Lord Dunsany's tribute as well. So, but he could also write hard-hitting political poetry if he chose to. And there's just a line out of a poem he wrote. Through his work in the cooperative movement, through his theosophical beliefs, through his love of nature, he thought the rural worker, male and female, were the most important people. They were the custodians of Mother Earth. And so rather than look down on it, this is probably how he got on so well in the cooperative movement, he didn't look down on some uneducated peasantry. He saw them as descendants of a noble race. And just that little one. And the restless ploughman pauses, turns, and wondering, deep beneath his rustic habit, finds himself a king. And there's the god protecting the rural worker. And that carried on into his, this is a hearing. This is just a little verse out of a poem, Carrow Moor, by the lake, actually in Mayo. Why not put a picture of Errigal there anyway? But and it's just the last verse of the poem where the fairies have come out. There was a dark brooding mountain, and it was all dark and gloomy, and suddenly the mood changed. And you can see the lyrical beauty of his poetry. The great gates of the mountain have opened once again, and the sound of songs and laughter have filled the hearts of men. And the land of youth lies gleaming, flushed with rainbow joy and mirth. and the old enchantment lingers in the honey heart of earth. And of course, our local group, we produced a little book of his poetry, and we used that last phrase there, the old enchantment lingers, because we found that it actually does. And if you go to the places where A.E. Russell was, to this day, they have a beauty and a charm. The old enchantment lingers. And I'll finish with this little poem, which again just shows how he connected sort of mysticism, spirituality, and nature. Its edges foamed with amethyst and rose, withers once more the old blue flower of day. There where the ether like a diamond glows, its petals fade away. And my favourite verse, a shadowy tumult stirs the dusky air, sparkle the delicate dews, the distant snows, the great deep thrills, for through it everywhere the breath of beauty blows. I saw how all the trembling ages passed, moulded to her by deep and deeper breath, near to the hour when beauty breathes her last and knows herself in death. So that's a taster of his poetry. I encourage you to explore further for yourselves. Quickly to his paintings. It was his favourite activity. He worked at the poetry. He worked tirelessly in the cooperative movement and in his editorial and journalistic roles. But he loved to come to Donegal. He was a creature of habit. And he would come every summer for maybe 30 years. And he'd come to this area and he would paint away like a demon. And he produced what he saw in his visions. He also produced some beautiful landscapes and beach scenes and mountain scenes. And but he got a bit of politics into his paintings as well. As a champion of the cooperative movement, as a champion of rural workers, as a champion of women's rights when no other men were at that time, he carried that into his paintings too. So there's one of his goddesses that he's seen in his dreams, but she's protecting the little rural homestead. That's how he saw it. And here's a couple of men working, and they're not really getting on all that well carrying that log. And contrastingly, the women seem to have it sussed. And similarly, another one. And he painted the women, you know, he didn't paint them as these wee shawly, gnarled up creatures, you know, tall, elegant, strong, was his view. And of course, carrying the basket together, they were cooperating. It was cooperation, it was that theme as well. And then this painting was the design on the cover sleeve of A Woman's Heart 1, you know, Mary Black and all those ones, which remains to this day the best-selling CD by an Irish artist in Ireland. And they picked it because it was a women's cooperative effort, the actual record. So they picked an image from someone who championed women's rights. Yeah, there we have the cooperative movement. Yeah, he hated poverty. He thought it could be eliminated. He could remember back, he had relatives who died in the famine back in the day. And he felt that through cooperation, you could end famine forever and you could get a much better quality of life into rural communities. He absolutely hated the fact, I mean, he quoted, I think it was Ballyhonus, County Roscommon or Mayo, 23 pubs, no library, no community centre, no facilities, nowhere for young people to go, nothing. But 23 pubs, and he just thought, you know, we can do better than this. So the cooperative movement wouldn't just sort out the creamery or the eggs or the purchasing of farm seeds and so on. It could do more in the community and make rural life every bit as interesting as urban life. And so he went around the country. He would put the bike on the train and he'd go way on all over the place, and he would set up a cooperative. He'd often stay with the local parish priest, who would have an interesting evening talking to him. That is what he did for him. So he set up hundreds of those cooperatives, and of course the one with Pat Gallagher in this area. And as he moved from the hands-on setting up the cooperative groups to running the newspaper of the cooperative movement, the Irish Homestead, and then later the Irish Statesman. And he wrote really knowledgeably and set out blueprints for the future as to how this new state of Ireland was coming along. It was coming along either peacefully or violently. He preferred peacefully, but it was coming along, and he wanted to give people blueprints for what it should comprise. So, you know, the building of a rural civilization. He wrote about, his most famous book was The National Being, saying what it would be if you actually had an independent Ireland, what would it be like? And of course, the old division between urban and rural, he thought in a cooperative Commonwealth arrangement, you could unite the two. So he did take an active part in the big issues of the time, of that era. Backed the workers in 1913, the famous Dublin lockout. Spoke on the floor or the stage of the Albert Hall about it. His letter to the masters of Dublin, the employers, is still much talked about. There's a big framed picture of it on the wall in the town hall in Lurgan. But he foresaw, you know, after 1913, he could see 1916 coming, he could see 1920 coming. And he, of course, tried to, he was a very active mover in the 1917 convention, constitutional convention that was aimed at heading off the trouble. Didn't succeed. He also used his creative talents in many other ways. Jim Larkin wanted a logo or a design or an emblem for the labour movement, and they came up with the Starry Plough. And the Starry Plough means all sorts of things to different people today, but when you think about it, urban workers wanted a symbol. Who else would give them a plough but AE Russell? And then the stars, of course, because they had a preoccupation with the stars in any event. And so we went right through that whole period, the Rising. He published a National Being. He tried to bring peace through the convention. You had the general election, War of Independence. Even after that, the shaky deal done after the War of Independence, he backed the government, he backed the pro-treaty side. He wanted stability. And you can see he took on the British authorities over their attacks on creameries and all the rest of it. And as the new Free State was set up, he remained a strong nationalist. He wanted Irish independence, but he wanted mostly to get some stability and some peace. He even had set up the Society of the United Irishwomen. He ran a silly debate in his own newspaper with two sides debating with each other, could the women actually form their own national movement? And one guy arguing, oh, they'll never get their act together. This one, oh no, I think they could do better than that. And he was writing both sides, just to get it moving. And so, as I say, I was involved in everything in that period. But here's some of the people that were influenced by him. You know, there's James Joyce, bottom left. A 19-year-old James Joyce was sitting on the steps of AE's house when AE came home from work very late one night and said to him, is it too late to talk? Joyce had been waiting there for hours. And Russell said, of course, it's never too late to talk. And he took him in, and Joyce showed him some of his poetry and some of his prose. And Russell more or less said to him, I'm using my own words here, but he more or less said, look, your poetry's all right, but it's not brilliant. After all, he was used to Yeats. But your prose is brilliant. And if you clean it up a bit, I'll publish it for you. So he was the first to publish Joyce in the National Statesman. JFK, I'm just taking these randomly. JFK addressed the Irish Parliament, the joint houses of the Oireachtas. He finished his speech quoting George Russell.
But the smaller nations of the world must fulfill their obligations as well. A great Irish poet once wrote, I believe profoundly in the future of Ireland, that this is an isle of destiny, that destiny will be glorious, and that when our hour is come, we will have something to give to the world. My friends, Ireland's hour has come. You have something to give to the world, and that is a future of peace with freedom.
Van Morrison, into the mystic. Van Morrison has acknowledged his influence by George Russell, and he was asked specifically, were you influenced in your songwriting by Yeats? He said, no, not Yeats, George Russell. Patrick Kavanagh adored Russell. He walked from Monaghan to Dublin to see Russell. It took him 3 days. He had to sleep in hay sheds overnight. He hadn't a penny. When he arrived, Russell gave him a load of books rather than something to eat. And he went off. But again, Russell was the first to publish him. And he later won the A. Russell Literary Prize when it was given out. The lady below, Pamela Travers, P.L. Travers, she wrote Mary Poppins. As a young writer, she contacted Russell. She wanted to get in the literary scene in Ireland. She was Australian, but she had Irish connections. And he took her on board. And he brought her up here. He was up here with her in this part of the world, walking around the woods and everything. The relationship was platonic. She was a good bit younger. But he gave her ideas for Mary Poppins, the mystical sense of it. And of course, there's a lovely bit of connection even today, because Pamela Travers was with Russell when he died, a really close friend. And afterwards, Russell's son, Dermot, became her literary agent and helped her sell the rights of Mary Poppins to Disney, which made her very wealthy. And Dermot Russell had a daughter, and he called her Pamela, after Pamela Travers. And she had a brother, William, as well. And we've been in touch with them, and we have direct connection to the family in America, so, which is very satisfying. James Connolly was a fan of Russell's. He loved what he wrote about workers, about labour, about cooperation, and particularly this idea that you don't divide the urban and the rural worker against each other. They're much stronger when they unite. Russell was an advisor to the Department of Agriculture in Roosevelt's administration. He was a good friend of Roosevelt's Vice President, Henry Wallace. And he met Roosevelt face to face. And some of the ideas in Russell's cooperative, sustainable rural communities really fitted with American challenges at the time. People were dashing into the cities and overflowing American cities with the Great Depression. And Russell was showing how you could, if you invested in rural communities, you could keep people happy rurally in their own sustainable communities. Yeats, I've already mentioned. Mahatma Gandhi was a fan of Russell's. On 2 counts, he read his spiritual stuff, a lot of which would have been derived from Russell's interest in the ancient Indian philosophies, but he also liked the practical stuff about cooperation and about sustainable communities, and about peace, peaceful change. It's not essential to have violence to achieve change. And the other thing makes Russell unique, just his personality. People talked about the piercing eyes. He seemed to know what you were thinking. He was unbelievably generous and kind with his time. A source of tension between him and Yeats. Yeats once said, George, you only deal with your equals or your betters. You don't waste time on anyone else. And he had no interest in money, and he spent his entire life. And what makes him different from all the big figures of that era, when you think about it, most of them had an agenda where they wanted to win out, or they wanted to be the best, or to succeed, or to beat the other guy. He wasn't interested in anything else, just service and move on. And that again came from the theosophy. And just to show what people thought, that's Henry Wallace, that's Roosevelt's vice president. And he was one of the finest, most gifted, most colourful people I ever knew. When he spoke, it was like hearing a symphony you could not repeat. But you wanted to hear it again, and you were the better for it. He could grip your closest attention as you listened steadily. Never anything but the utmost humility, simplicity, sweetness, and light. May God grant that the Irish may be able to produce, produce such a man again. So that's pretty high praise from a pretty important figure. In 1985, on the 50th anniversary of Russell's passing, the government here commissioned a bust, and the IAOS, Plunkett's cooperative movement, commissioned a bust, which stands today in Merrion Square. And there was a whole ceremony led by the Taoiseach, and they brought the family over from America and so on. And they made 2 of them. And they sent the second one to Lurgan, where our council parked it on the back staircase of the old town hall. So we'll get it out in the open, yes. So that's George Russell. Poet, painter, mystic, publisher, editor, designer, economist, rural reformer, philosopher, commentator, visionary thinker. I didn't even mention, Yeats chaired the Committee on Irish Coins in the New Ireland. And Yeats probably would have put some kind of vain symbols on it, but he went to Russell, consulted Russell, and that's why the early Irish coins have like a cow and a pig and a hen, a salmon, and you know, it's Russell again. He's at it again with the symbols of rural Ireland. And I'm going to talk just for a second about this place, Glenveagh and Kingsley Porter. Kingsley Porter was an American academic. He was a brilliant archaeologist and brilliant at writing up the antiquities of anywhere that he went. And he was based in Harvard. He persuaded him to have a look at Ireland, and he went around and did work on Ireland's high crosses and innovative work. His wife, Lucy, was a brilliant photographer. And so anyway, they came over, they fell in love with the place. They had lots of money, they were wealthy Americans, and they bought Glenveagh Castle. And Russell used to stay there in the late, sort of around 1930, and for 2 or 3 years. And they were great friends. And if you go to the castle, there's a room there's some of Russell's paintings, and there's a room there kept exactly as it was when Russell stayed there. But what makes Kingsley even more interesting is that despite the luxury of the castle, he had a little cottage on the island of Inishbofin, Donegal, just off Maharorty, and just quite near where that little beach in the middle is where it was. And I think he just liked to rough it a bit rather than have the castle. So on one fateful night in 1933, Russell arrived, and it had all been prearranged. Russell arrived in Dunfanaghy, and he was due to meet Kingsley and Lucy at Maharorty Pier as they come off the island, and then they were going to go back to the castle. And when the boat came in, Russell's sitting there with Kingsley's driver, and the only person gets off the boat is Lucy. There's no Kingsley. He's disappeared. They'd searched the island all afternoon for him and couldn't find him. And he had just vanished. Now, Russell had to do a lot of tidying up. The guards weren't great at writing up the report. Russell had to do that. He took Lucy back to Glenveagh, spent a few days there with her. She was convinced she would never see him again. But the mystery is that Kingsley, of course, had another life. Kingsley was a gay man, but he didn't really want to reveal that publicly. It wouldn't have gone well for him in Harvard. But Lucy knew all about that, and Kingsley had numerous male partners, some at the castle, and I think there's a corridor in the castle, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's called like the Bachelor's Corridor, where some of Kingsley's guests would be installed. So the theory was then that maybe Kingsley decided to disappear and just start a new life somewhere else. The locals on the island do not believe that he drowned. There are stories that there was a boat anchored off the island the day he disappeared. Kingsley was a strong swimmer, and at certain tides here, the distance to dry land, the mainland, is very, very short indeed. So there's a theory, Jimmy might expand on it, but he could have ended up in India. Lucy Porter continued to write or publish Kingsley's work long after he had long after he disappeared. So there's a thought that he just lived another life. And of course, it was a pupil of his in 1937. Lucy went back to America, and there was a pupil of his who McElhenney then bought the castle and did the fantastic collection, a lot of refurbishment, and that's pretty much McElhenney's castle you see today. I'll finish on one final slide on AE, and what makes him kind of uniquely interesting is that I said that he was a confused young man, wondering about these visions, looking for answers. When he went into the Theosophy House, he got those answers. He got them in the ancient Indian philosophies. He got them in the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishad, etc., etc. And he went forth then from that time, from he left the Theosophy House, to just do all his stuff right across the whole spectrum of Irish life for a 30-year period. And when he died in Bournemouth in a nursing home in 1935. He came home to Dún Laoghaire. There was an aerial fly past, whatever 2 or 3 airplanes were in Ireland did a fly past at Dún Laoghaire as he came in. And the Irish Times records that the funeral procession out to Harold's Cross was a mile long. And it's amazing that there's somebody most people have never heard of, was so popular at that time. He was a household name. But when he was buried in Mount Jerome Cemetery, the Friends put up a headstone, and even there, more innovative design, first man with a logo. But I moved among men and places, and in living I learned the truth at last. I know I am a spirit, and that I went forth in old time from the self-ancestral to labours yet unaccomplished. Now, you could see somebody write that at the end of their lives, you know, when they're contemplating the end and what did they do. But he saw himself as a spirit who had done a job here and would do a job in the next place. But remarkably, he wrote that. It's the preface to his very first anthology, which appeared in the early 1890s. But he wrote that line in his mid-20s. I know I am a spirit. So it sorted out what he was about. So I think we'll hear a lot more about the connection to Donegal, but I think in his own right, you don't know about him, a remarkable person. Thank you.
Talk's going to be a short one. Before listen to the good Charlie Gallagher here. So I was thinking about, you know, the national park here and the wonderful job that the people do here. They made us really, really good friends of them, and they were very friendly to us. And when I come in here, I feel like part of the family nearly, and the surroundings are magnificent. So I started to think about AE up here, and you know, his interaction with nature and the spiritual side of nature. So AE had 2 sons and a daughter, and the daughter died in infancy, and she was called Maeve. And so when she died, AE and Valak went up to a place called Kiltartan, Michael says, near bPáirc, to sort of mourn or whatever. And he painted this painting when he was mourning. And it's the only painting that both him and Valak signed, the two of them signed this painting. This was when he was mourning the death of his only girl child. And so this is his comfort zone is nature, and it's trees, and you can see how green it is, and that's what he was trying to cheer himself up with. So that's really where AE lived. That's his comfort zone, is nature. So we'll move. Let me just see if I can move this right on me. So what I'll read here is a wee bit from Lady Gregory. But we started talking about Lady Gregory here first, because she sort of explained the Irish Liberty Revival and their beliefs. From the most ancient time, our ancestors have regarded as spiritual and given names to the trees, fields, rocks, rivers, lakes, and mountains. We have written mythologies, poems, songs, and legends about our natural surroundings that permeates our character, and we call this character the Irish diaspora. AE said, I was excited by the literature in which the seers seemed to have gone into a divine nature and come back dark and shining and God intoxicated. I had imaginations merging my spirit in the spirit of nature. That's what AE believed in nature. So Lady Gregory said that trees vanish very quickly, and a clump that has taken years to grow is gone in a day. And those words were written just over 127 years ago by Lady Augusta Gregory. If woods, like friendships, are not kept in constant repair, the day will come when they will be but a memory, she wrote. And she wrote this in the Irish Cooperative Movement's journal, The Irish Homestead, which of course was edited and managed by AE. We are not likely to have more lasting monuments put over us, she wrote, and we cannot have more gracious ones than the living rustling trees that we had planted and that we had loved. She wrote that Ireland, more than any other country, ought to be a country of trees, since the letters in the modern Irish alphabet are derived from the Ogham letters named after the trees. AE Russell recommended the spirituality that could be gained by living close to the land. He painted scenes of woodlands, agricultural fields, and midland bogs, most of them with human figures in the landscape. Joyce represents him as saying that the movements which work revolutions in the world are born out of the dreams and visions in a peasant's heart on the hillside. For them, the earth is not an exploitable ground, but the living mother. So this one here really, Michael did touch on it. AE's grandmother died in Black 47 during the famine. And this would have a big influence on, well, a lot of it's economics, because he wanted to break the cycle. Ireland just didn't have one famine, by the way, it had one every generation almost. And AE wanted to break that cycle of famines and create a new economy through the cooperative movement that would sort of stop the famines, really. The Irish Literary Revival was a reaction. It was a cultural preservation to the Great Famine, during which AE's grandmother died. And it was similar to, we had the annals of the great monks from Donegal here, wrote the annals, and they were doing the same. They were preserving all the culture of Ireland and its history and its character, really. And that was because of obviously the plantation. So this cultural revolution or preservation, the Irish Literary Revival, they weren't just involved in literature, they were involved in all aspects of the Irish culture, and they were trying to preserve it all. So really, where did it all begin? This is Glenveagh Park. It's second only in size to Phoenix Park. Beautiful place if you ever want to visit it. And I can't, if it had a pointer anyway, I thought, the red circle over here is where AE was born, this red circle here. And of course this is Lough Neagh, which would have been a big influence on him. There's a lot of mythologies about Lough Neagh, a lot of gods in Lough Neagh, and it was the very first people to settle in Ireland actually settled around this shore. That was the Mesolithic people, and they brought their gods with them. And so the god of Lough Neagh is Hockey, the god. It's actually being polluted at the minute. You probably seen it on the TV, it's being destroyed. So this is a birthplace of our nation, and we're allowing it to be polluted, but we'll not dwell on that too much. So later on in life, he would come down to this one. This is where he would live, in the park, the Brownlow's big estate. And it was a magical place. This day, it's still magical, like. So he wrote, it was an exciting of spirit for one born in a little country town, so that life seemed to dilate into a paradise of beautiful memories, and to reach the past ages and to mix with the eternal consciousness of earth. And when we come on what is new, we pause to contemplate it, and do not hurry to the end of our journey. That was in the Candle Vision. This reverence came to me as a boy. I was supposed to be better move on now. That's the lake again, and you can see a lot of them houses wouldn't have existed, but the lake is still there, and it's still beautiful. And that's what it's like at night time. That's the castle, Marble Hill Castle in the background there. You can see how magical it is. So this was a painting he did, thinking back in his memory. And you can see the poem there, effervescent. It flickered mid the daffodils and danced their gentle dance, then rose up slenderly in air. It was as still as a trance. It entered in, the magic thing, into your being flowed, through lips and eyes and fluttered hair, its precious substance glowed. So he was seeing these figures of the child then in the Glenveagh Park and the daffodils and things like that there. And he come from an evangelical background. They were Church of Ireland, but he went to the primitive Methodist Sunday school, which was very evangelical. And so he, coming from this evangelical background, he couldn't understand. The evangelical background didn't explain what these things, what these visions he was having. It didn't explain that. So he spent all his life trying to figure this thing out. And this is where a lot of the spiritualism came from. And even if you see some of his poems, you can see a lot of evangelical Christianity in some of his poems, believe it or not, even though he was a theosophist. This reverence, did I read a bit? This reverence came to me as a boy listening to the voice of birds. One coloured evening in summer, when suddenly birds and trees and grass, tinted air, myself seeing but one mood or companionship, and I felt certitude that the same spirit was all. So, there's another painting similar to this one, and you can see, most people miss a lot, and you can see an actual spirit in the background there as well. If you look closely at it, there's no spirit in there. And so a lot of his paintings have this hidden metaphor in them as well. If you look carefully at them, there's bits in them you can't see. Remember I showed you another painting upstairs? So Another wee thing he wrote was, a friend I greet in each flower and tree and wind. Oh, but life is sweet, is sweet. I hope to enable us to understand the language which the gods speak to us through flowers and trees and natural forms. So AE may be one of the forerunners of a new culture in which mankind will find its spiritual rebirth. So we can learn a lot from what AE was telling us, and the respect we should have for the earth, and treat it as it should be treated, as a spiritual thing. So, you know, we have people here who are experts on Ellie Young, and she really did that in America. Ellie Young actually really inspired the growth of the hippie movement. You know, and she saved the redwood forests in America. She saved them from, you know, their destruction. Well, that was one of AE's proteges. Ernest Boyd visited AE up here in Bunaitheoir in 1812, and he said he painted, composed, and meditated, communing with that nature which was vital and alive in all its aspects, as man is alive and vital in all his members. Russell's visionary experience reminded us that the very earth is holy, and permeated as it is by the life of spirit. He believed he was on friendly terms with the winds, the mountains, and would be granted an insight into the destiny which the great powers are shaping for the Irish in this isle, the mingling of God and nature and man in one being, one yet infinite in number. Padraig Colum has described in a few words the true strength and appeal that we feel in AE's prose and poetry. He said, "One has the sense of hearing a deep sound in nature, a sound that becomes more significant as one listens to it. How is it that these short poems, very many of them only 3 stanzas, give one the sense of fullness and profundity? It is because they are all glimpses of the same river of vision. To this day, specific isolated trees and bushes across the Irish landscape are left alone in reverence and cautions for their presence." So AE had an experience, probably in Lurgan Park, when he was walking past these poplar trees, and he got to one of the poplar trees, and he went into one of these visions, or he believed he was transmuted to India, and he started to live a life as a child in India. And he ends up getting killed, and when he gets killed, he then reappears out of the next tree. So he really believed this to happen. So he's transmuted in these, he was having these things happening to him, like, and they said the evangelical background didn't explain it. Now, Michael touched on the Starry Plough flag. This is actually the original Starry Plough flag. The one that Michael put up was one that was redesigned by McGahey for the 1916 Rising, and that was the politicised one. This flag originally was not a political flag. It was for the workers of the 1913 lockout. So it wasn't, well, I suppose you could call it a wee bit political, but it wasn't the emblem that it has now been used as, and you know, almost every political organisation in Ireland now uses the flag for their own ends. But it was for the workers that he designed this. And as Michael said, it was an amazing, if you think of the concept of it, it was for an urban people, and he bring an agricultural implement. So why? Well, the Starry flag plough was unveiled and designed by AE Russell for the Irish Citizen Army in the 1913 lockdown. The co-founder of the Irish Citizen Army, James Conway, said that a free Ireland would control its own destiny from the plough to the stars. So, what do we know about the Starry Plough constellation? Well, it's called Ursa Major, or the Big Dipper. And it's visible all year round. And I think that's the clue. This is the controversy now, and this is the bit that told Michael, I didn't want to tell Michael about. So what is this? What does this remind you of? The swastika. So this was obviously an American one, but it was North America. You know, it's the same thing happens to us, only we don't use the word fall. We would call it the autumn. So it's circling around all the time. And AE was known, believe it or not, as the North Star. And he didn't call himself that. Other people called him the North Star because of his guidance and his direction and things like that there, you know. So, due to the Earth's rotation, the plough appears to circle around the North Star, maintaining its presence in the night sky across all seasons. However, its orientation changes throughout the year, making it useful as a celestial marker for navigation and stargazing. In India, it's referred to as the Saptasarishi, which means the 7 rishis. The Sanskrit term rishi meaning a sage or a saint. 7 bright stars, mysterious constellation of the 7 rishis in the Great Bear. Egypt held them sacred. India has connected all these symbols to the ages and ages ago with time or the yoga revolutions. And the Saptasaris are intimately connected with our present age, the dark Kali Yuga, which AE called the Iron Age. He referred to what's happening in the world, specifically even more now, the Iron Age, the heartless time, it's not soft anymore, it becomes the Iron Age. He called it the Iron Age. People don't care anymore. They've all got hard and iron instead of being caring. She goes on to say that the Bhagavad Gita Purana scripture, which AE was an expert in, called the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the Great Circle of Time. 7 rishis mark the time, the duration of the events in the Septensarian life cycle. These are the mysterious, as they are supposed to be the waves of Pleiades and reveal mysteries of the occult nature. Today's big hero was Madame Blavatsky, of course. You probably recognise. You might recognise that cross yourself. You've done a lot of work on that, and you can see what's on the top of it there. So this symbol, it wasn't the Nazis. Of course, they politicised it and used it for their own ends, but it was a very ancient symbol, and all over the world people used it, and it's a symbol of goodness. It wasn't an evil symbol. It has certainly become one now, and that's it on St Bridget's, on the cross at St Bridget's Well, that's down in Sligo, isn't it? Down in Sligo direction, yeah. You can see it there, but there's lots of them all around Ireland. These wee swastikas on different things. Madame Blavatsky, who was his good friend, says that the so-called Saptarshishis is mysterious. The plows associated with the cycles of time, especially connected with the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, presently underway on the earth. They are symbolized as lying across the loins of the circle of time. The swastika is a word of Sanskrit meaning the origin of be it or remain. The swastika is an architectural symbol whose wide dispersal around the globe. The Theosophist lands conferred the swastika as a symbol of primeval gnosis found in the prehistorical paintings and carvings literally all over the world. Europe, India, the Americas, of course in Ireland. An ancient symbol of life and success in India from at least 2000 BC, or 200 BC, sorry. A religious symbol of the Hindu culture. It also appears in the Jain and the Buddhist religious art. So you'll be glad to know that we're finished with the swastika now. So as you can see, there's the Pleiades. Just showed that there. And the Pleiades, of course, is a big thing in Mary Poppins, where it has a big party one time, and all the stars come to visit, and Pleiades is all there. So in Mary Poppins, there's a lot of metaphors. It's not a children's book. It never was meant to be for children, but children love it. And there's a lot of theosophy and mysticism that they handed down till Pamela Travers, all through it. If you know where to look for it, like. But Pleiades is a big part in Mary Poppins and some of the sequences in it. And this is Pamela Travers with AE, and as Michael said, she came up to stay with him here regularly. And there's a lovely story. In fact, no, I'm not sure if she hasn't. It's maybe one of his sketches he did of her, but she has a big pair of boots on her. And it's because they're going over Breggy Head, and he puts these big boots on, but they're massive for her, so he fills it full of newspapers. And she loses her boots on Breggy Head. So I tell the people around there, Mary Poppins' boots are stuck up in Breggy Head, But she spent a lot of time here. I think when Michael, I'm not sure if he mentioned it there, but when he died, she came up around this area and stayed in places that he would have stayed. Almost certainly she would have been here in Ghleann Bheatha. Just definitely was in Marble Hill, and stayed in the wee cottage in Marble Hill just to get the essence of him again, So So, if you watch the Mary Poppins film, you'll see the bit where he's chucking this. Bert is based on AE, by the way. Bert, the chimney sweep. And that's why he has all the different instruments and all the different. He's a myriad-minded man, a myriad he could do everything. Like he's involved in all different things. So that's why she has him playing all these different. Bert, the chimney sweep in Mary Poppins, AE Russell, because he was an economist, an agriculturist, a mystic, a poet. So that's why he's playing all the different instruments. But and early on in the film, he's sketching this painting, or on the ground, drawing it out, and he tells them that the magic is behind the trees, and they jump into this magical world behind the trees, right? So both George Russell and WB were born into a rich tapestry of folklore, heritage, and they synthesise these traditions with modern mysticism. It's steeped in metaphor and mystical exploration. The writing and paintings are emerging philosophies of this time and are explored and extending the tensions between the spirit world and ours. The cultural roots were deeply entwined with the mysteries of nature. A had a profound influence on Pamela Travers, and I told you about that bit about the chalk and the paintings. So Iron sold it broke the wrath of the Iron Age and the weight of the Iron Powers. This was A talking in 1919. And the last slide, hopefully, is A looking at the future. Is this the future we're going to leave ourselves? Are we going to destroy treeless land? A thousand years hence, this is A's painting of 1,000 years hence. And if we don't do something, this is why this place is so important here. They're preserving that nature. And if we don't we'll end up at something like that in the future. I think there was one more. You ever get to Ely Place? Beautiful murals. He did these beautiful murals in Ely Place. And if you ever get to Ely Place, you can go in, well, if you're polite and ask, they'll let you in to see them. And you can see this beautiful mystical world and the planets all around it. So I said that wasn't going to take you long, and I finish on that.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Charlie Gallagher, and I'm from down near Marble Hill, a townland called Fáiltiú. And my brief talk will be giving you an insight into AE Russell's interaction with the local community there. I of an age, of a generation that knew people that worked and interacted, or that knew, in other words, knew AE Russell personally. And one of my, I can say, some of these people, my oldest informant was a lady, she was born in 1883, and they would have worked in Marble Hill House. They would have worked in Ards, which was the seat of the Stuart Bams in their time, and they have very wide range of stories that they passed on to me. So to start with, the AE, you'll say, how did he come to be in Donegal? Well, my theory is that Hugh A. Law was an MP, a nationalist, an Irish National Party MP from 1902 to 1918, and he also then served later on in the 1920s in the New Dáil. But Hugh Law was belonged to a wealthy County Meath family that his father was very high up in the British administration in Dublin. In fact, he was the Lord Chancellor of Ireland in the last years of the 19th century. But what happened then was that Hugh A. Law, his son, married Charlotte Stewart. In other words, she was known as Lotta, and they, with their wealth, they bought the rectory at Marble Hill, which is Marble Hill House, at a small estate with it. But Hughie Law was one of these wonderful people that, in a true sense, was caring for the community, and he tried to attract all the different people that would be of benefit to it. And of course, it was, as it was mentioned by earlier speakers, where the Irish Renaissance or revival, Celtic revival, was taking place, and Marble Hill House became a mecca or a hub for all these people. And of course, among them was AE Russell, Horace Plunkett, Paddy the Cope. These were all mentioned earlier, and Jack B. Yeats was also a visitor. Now, there was no tourist infrastructure here much of the time except a few boarding houses, and one of those boarding houses is still there, but it's not used now as a private house, Mullins of Brahy, overlooking Port Nabla. And Mullins of Brahy have a visitors book where all the different people that it was mainly, of course, gentry, as they called them at the time, that would have come to that. And some of the names would be, of course, Jack B. Yeats was one of those who stayed there, and also Scott of the Antarctic. I collaborated with Father David in Ards Friary when he was compiling the book on the history of Ards, and he actually wrote to Scott, Peter Scott, the naturalist, and Peter Scott was alive at the time, and he sent a lovely letter back, and he told about the pleasant memories he had of being in this area. And as a child, he cycled down a slope and in the front door of this particular house. So you can see immediately the attraction to this area. Now, AE Russell, of course, was very friendly with the Laws, and himself and Lotta Law collaborated together in this quest for more information about the spiritual dimension to life. And of course, their main quest was the fairies. And there's some very amusing stories, and of course locals found it very amusing as to all the exploits that they were up to. One of them was, and if you know the Sheephaven Bay, there's quite a large island to the east of Marble Hill Beach. We would call it Patterson's Island, but on the map is marked as Clonmass Island. And they used to go out there, spend the night there, looking and listening to see if they could hear the fairies or see them performing. I don't know whether they did it. But also, he his paintings as well, he used the young the Law family, the children, as subjects in his paintings. They're painted as sort of fairy characters. If you see any of his paintings in Marble Hill, with the grey trunks of the beech trees and that. So he did quite a lot of painting. In fact, my father, as quite a young man, he would have been a sort of a teenager at the time, with a much older friend from Derry, were walking along on that particularly beautiful part where you leave the Marble Hill Big Beach, going towards a smaller beach. It's an elevated road where you're looking out through framed pictures through the beech trees. And they'd seen this man sitting with a beard painting. And when they went past, this older man says, "Do you know who that is?" That's AE Russell. Of course, he never heard of AE. This was part of his, he was actually doing one of his paintings. Now, as well as that, he rented a house there at a place called Parkmore and stayed there. And while he was there, when he was leaving in the autumn, he employed a local woman with a big family to do his washing for him. And he gave her 2 of his paintings. And one of them is particularly, he can identify it immediately as a Russell, in that it has the trees, the children, and the other one, of course, was based down in Galway. It's a more lighter colour. Also, he stayed at another house as a boarder up at the Brahy. It's a very exposed house, but there are great views around from it. And the family there, the Stewart family, in fact, by a coincidence, the man that lived there was a retired RIC man from Lurgan. So he stayed there. Now, I know that the group that were here in the autumn 2 years ago visited and seen these photographs. I haven't seen them. I did see the ones from Parkmore. So that gives you an idea of his depth of contact with the local people. Now, there's when we're talking about the house on Brahy, I always point out to them the painting here in Glenveagh Castle. It's titled Muckish. That was literally painted outside their front door where he set up his easel, and he had a view of Muckish with various hills in the foreground. So that can be identified exactly where it was painted from. He also, of course, mentioned there his association with Arthur Kingsley Porter. And Porter, of course, admired him. And, of course, it was well illustrated in the earlier talks about him being down on Maharorty Pier waiting on them on that fateful day in August 1933 when Kingsley Porter didn't come back. But these are just a few points that I just wanted to mention about Russell. Now, the question is then about the other families that were involved. I mentioned earlier about Hugh A. Law. He invited these various different people to come to stay, and of course they in turn then spread the word around. And at that time there was great optimism. You had over in the opposite side, you had the 5th Earl of Leitrim developed the Rosapenna Hotel, and a lot of those days, of course, it wasn't mass tourism. It was people, usually wealthy people, that came, and as a result of that, they came to the area. So these are just a few points that related. Last week, I gave a talk on the Stewards of Ards and William Murray in Manor Cunningham. And there were 2 people there from the opposite side, and they were looking across at Marble Hill, and they could see that Marble Hill House had changed. Now, I should point out to you, my last encounter with this wonderful group was at Marble Hill House in August 2023, and we discussed. And it was wonderful to meet there because you could sense the atmosphere where A.E. Russell spent, I'm sure, many happy days. And there's a very well-researched book on Arthur Kingsley Porter, which also points out that A.E. Russell, the Law, Hugh A. Law, and the various, probably the lawyers and that, it was in the sitting room of Marble Hill House that the deal was clinched where Kingsley Porter bought the estate here in Glenveagh. So that just gives you an idea of the close association they had with this area. And I say now, A.E. said that he was really in love with this particular part of the world, and he said everywhere where he set up his easel, he had a scene to paint, so that just gives you an idea. So these are just a few points that I felt. Now, I should point out as well, for your own perusal and research, there's an archive, a government-sponsored archive called the Law Photographic Archive, which has a number of photographs. One, I think, is a grainy photograph of A.E. Russell sitting on the rock down on the beach at Marble Hill, and I can point out the exact rock that he was sitting on. But as well as that, Lotta Law had a passion for building houses, and she built the 2 houses, Umracam and Umrafree, that you can still see there today. And she also built a little house up in the woods, and they called it the Fairy House. It was actually a playhouse for children. But there's actually a photograph of, I think it's probably in the Law's private collection, it shows A.E. Russell sitting in this house. But in that particular house, he painted on the wall a beautiful mural. It was actually a maritime scene where you seen fish and green water, so to speak. But sadly, that little house was very badly vandalised way back about 20 or 30 years ago, and is a ruin at this point in time. So as I say, also he, Lotta Law, his daughter, who lived in Umracam, Umracam, that she lived in, she said that all these different people that came there, the Laws were very hospitable to them. And Patrick Pearse was there at a Caisleán Ghleann Bheatha. They actually had a dance hall there at Marble Hill House, and they held ceilidhs. It was again was part of this Celtic revival. So these are just a few points. But what I would point out as well now, I'm happy to say that Marble Hill House has been restored by Natalie. She was here, she had to leave. She has it's changed hands a number of times. It was first bought by a gentleman called Davin, and then Mr. Harrison, and of course Natalie's mother, Dorothy Joblin Purser, in the early 70s, totally restored it. It then was neglected, but her grandniece now has greatly restored it. So if you're ever down at Marble Hill, you can see it set in beautiful grounds there overlooking Shiphaven Bay. So these are just a few points that ties in the great AE Russell to the local area. So I think, thank you very much.